I didn't know that my generosity would one day become the very weapon used to betray me. I couldn't have guessed that my son I raised and sacrificed everything for would eventually be the one to conspire with his wife to take me down. I had given them everything I had, money, trust, and heart, and I did it willingly. If anyone had told me back then that I was being taken advantage of, I would have defended them without hesitation. Because when you love someone unconditionally, you don't imagine them capable of deceit. You don't see manipulation behind every favor or hidden motives behind every smile. You just see your family. But I was wrong, and they had taken advantage of my love and kindness. My next course of action will make them regret taking me for granted and betraying me. Before we continue with the story, comment where you are watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel to get more uplifting stories about women that have been betrayed and mistreated by family members, but still got back on their feet with a happy ending. Now back to our story. I used to believe that my life still had purpose because of my son, Daniel, and his wife Elise. When my husband, Harold, passed away, the silence in our home became unbearable. Every corner of the house echoed with his absence. Every creak in the floor reminded me that I was now alone. But Daniel filled that void, or so I thought. He called every day, came by with groceries, fixed things around the house, and made sure I never felt forgotten. He'd smile and say, "We're a team, Mom. You, me, and Elise." And I believed him. I clung to those words like they were a promise, something solid to hold on to in the fog of grief. My love for Daniel and his family grew deeper after Harold's death. He had always been my pride, the kind of son any mother would want, polite, hardworking, and charming. When he married Elise, I welcomed her with open arms. She was warm, graceful, and always called me Mom. Together, they seemed like everything Harold and I had dreamed for him, a family built on love and success. So when they mentioned buying a house, it felt natural to help. I told myself I was doing what any mother would do, supporting her child's dream, securing a future for her grandson. I withdrew my savings, liquidated part of my pension, and used Harold's life insurance. It wasn't a small amount. It was everything I had ever saved, everything Harold and I had built together over decades of hard work. But it didn't feel like a loss. It felt like an investment in family. I remember sitting at the bank that day, signing the transfer papers with tears of pride in my eyes. When I wired the final payment, I felt fulfilled. My heart swelled knowing I was giving them stability, a home where my grandson would grow up safe and happy. The moment Daniel called to say the house was officially theirs, his voice was full of excitement. "We couldn't have done this without you, Mom," he said. I could almost hear Elise smiling beside him. That simple gratitude meant the world to me. I imagined family dinners in their new dining room, birthdays in the backyard, and holidays with laughter echoing through those walls I helped pay for. It was the closest thing to joy I'd felt in years. But beneath all that happiness was something I couldn't name then, a quiet imbalance. Looking back, I realize how easily I gave without ever being asked twice. Every time Daniel said, "It's for the baby, Mom," I reached for my checkbook. When Elise talked about remodeling the nursery, I offered to cover it before she even finished her sentence. I was eager to be needed. After losing Harold, being useful made me feel alive again. Daniel assured me it was all temporary. "You'll still be co-owner, Mom," he'd said when I signed the property papers. "We're just using your name to strengthen the credit. You're part of everything we do." His words felt comforting. I didn't read the fine print. I didn't think I needed to. Love doesn't ask for proof, right? I began visiting their home often, sometimes helping Elise with the baby, sometimes just watching Daniel work on his new business ventures. He always spoke with such confidence about the future, how this investment or that loan would pay off soon. I trusted him completely. I told myself Harold would be proud of how well Daniel was managing things. On the nights I came home after visiting them, I'd sit in my quiet living room and look at the framed family photo on the mantel. Daniel holding his son, Elise smiling, and me standing beside them, hand on her shoulder. That picture represented everything I thought I had left. love, unity, and purpose. Until the day came when I would finally hear the truth in their own voices, and realize that the bond one thought was built on love had been built on something much darker. That afternoon began like any other. Quiet, peaceful, the kind of stillness I used to treasure. The sunlight poured gently through the lace curtains, dust motes dancing in its warmth. I had just finished making tea when the phone rang. It was Daniel and Elise. We were discussing some paperwork. Nothing unusual, just routine documents connected to the house and a few pending transactions. I listened patiently, my pen poised over a notepad, jotting down the details as Elise's cheerful voice filled the line. When we wrapped up, I wished them a good afternoon, said my usual "love you both," and waited for the click that signaled the call had ended. But it didn't disconnect. For a moment I hesitated, hearing faint static on the line. Laughter. Not the kind that warms you. This laughter had an edge to it, sharp, mocking, and wrong. I froze, one hand resting on the teapot, my mind trying to make sense of it. It was Daniel's laugh first, familiar, but laced with something cold I'd never heard before. Then came his words, slicing through the stillness like glass. "She's too clueless to realize what's happening." My breath caught. Before I could even process the sting of his voice, Elise joined in, her tone dripping with amusement. "She practically handed everything over," she said. Their laughter overlapped. Light, easy, cruel. In that moment something inside me broke. The teacup slipped from my hand, crashing against the tiled floor, shattering into pieces that mirrored the sound in my chest. I didn't move. The warmth drained from my body as their voices continued through the receiver, still laughing, still tearing away the image I'd built of them, the family I thought I knew. My son, my only child, the boy whose scraped knees I once kissed, whose tears I once wiped away, was mocking me. My mind raced backward through the years. Every time he said, "You're the best, Mom." Every hug that had felt genuine, every phone call that made me feel needed, all of it twisted into something grotesque. The love I had clung to so fiercely now felt like a lie replaying in my head. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, even though I couldn't bear to hear more. I needed to be sure this wasn't a misunderstanding, some cruel joke. But the words kept coming, each one heavier than the last. I could almost see them. Daniel leaning back, that smug grin, Elise's hand on his arm as they celebrated their cleverness. I wanted to hang up, but I couldn't move. My hand trembled, frozen between disbelief and realization. I thought I was helping them build a future. Instead, I'd built a throne for their arrogance. The smell of my tea filled the room, lavender and honey, but it turned my stomach. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it echoing in my ears. My home, once a refuge of peace, now felt like a cage. I stared at the mess of broken porcelain on the floor, the tea spreading like a slow, creeping stain, and it felt symbolic somehow, a perfect picture of everything I just lost. When their laughter finally faded, I pressed the button they had forgotten to, ending the call with a deliberate click. The silence that followed was deafening. For a long while I sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, indifferent to the collapse of my world. I thought of Harold, what he would have said, how he would have warned me to be careful, to read every line before signing. But I had trusted love over logic. I had believed my son was incapable of deceit. My throat tightened, but no tears came. Not one. I wasn't sad, I was hollow. It wasn't heartbreak that settled in my chest. It was awareness. That morning, I had been proud of what I'd done. I'd looked at myself in the mirror and thought I'd given meaning to my remaining years. But by evening I saw the truth. I hadn't been selfless. I'd been blind. My love, my loyalty, my willingness to give, they weren't virtues to Daniel and Elise. They were tools. I rose slowly, stepping over the shards of porcelain, and reached for a towel to wipe the spill. My movements were calm, almost mechanical. Each swipe of the cloth steadied me. I wasn't the weak, naive woman they believed me to be. Not anymore. As I wrung the towel dry, I whispered to the empty room. Not anymore. It wasn't a cry of despair. It was a vow. A quiet declaration that something inside me had shifted forever. The woman who once signed papers without question, who trusted too easily, who believed love was enough, she no longer existed. By nightfall, the kitchen was spotless again, but I knew nothing in my life would ever be the same. That night I couldn't sleep. The silence of the house felt heavier than ever, pressing against me like a weight I couldn't shake off. The clock in the hallway ticked with cruel precision, marking every second I sat awake, trying to steady my thoughts. I kept seeing their faces, Daniel's smug grin, Elisa's satisfied smile, echoing behind my eyelids each time I blinked. My mind refused to rest. I went to the study where Harold used to keep our records, the faint smell of old paper and cedar greeting me as I switched on the lamp. Its soft glow spread across the desk, and there, sitting neatly beside my laptop, was the folder Elise had once helped me organize, the one she'd said was for transparency. I remember how proud she had been setting it up. "This way you'll always have access, Mom," she'd said sweetly. I had thanked her then, grateful for her thoughtfulness. Now the memory made my stomach twist. With trembling fingers, I opened the shared digital folder. At first glance, everything looked harmless. Savings statements, mortgage records, tax forms. Then I saw an unfamiliar file name. Clicked it. My heart began to race. A business account under my name, attached to an address I didn't recognize. I scrolled through the transaction history. Large deposits, sudden withdrawals, then transfers directly into Daniel's accounts. My name appeared everywhere. My signature too. But I didn't remember signing any of it. I clicked another folder. Then another. Each one revealed a deeper betrayal. Loans taken out in my name. Approvals that required my authorization. Investment portfolios marked high risk. All of them tied back to Daniel and Elise. Every time I thought I'd reached the bottom, a new layer surfaced. More deceit buried under false updates and fake explanations. My head throbbed, my vision blurred, but I couldn't stop. They hadn't just used me. They had built an entire empire of manipulation using my trust as the foundation. If any of those ventures failed, it wouldn't be Daniel's name on the line. It would be mine. Every missed payment, every financial risk, every legal liability. All roads led back to me. The thought made my hands cold, but strangely, my fear didn't come with tears. There was no sobbing, no shouting, no collapse into despair. What settled in me instead was something sharper, quieter, resolve. I pulled out the printer and began my work. Each document I opened, I printed. I laid the pages across the table, one by one, lining them like puzzle pieces. I labeled every folder carefully. Accounts, loans, transfers, risk statements. The sound of the printer hummed like a metronome to my thoughts. When the ink ran low, I replaced the cartridge without hesitation. I was no longer the trusting mother they had counted on. I was the woman preparing for battle. Beside me, Clover jumped onto the chair, her small body curling near my elbow. She looked up at me with her calm, knowing eyes, as if she could feel the storm inside me. I reached out to stroke her soft fur. "It's all right, Clover," I whispered. "We're just getting started." I reached for my old leather journal, the one Harold had gifted me decades ago for recording family milestones. Its pages were yellowed, but still sturdy. Tonight it would serve a different purpose. I drew neat lines across each page and began writing. Dates, figures, account names, cross-references. I recorded everything like evidence in a case file. Every number, every file path, every small detail mattered now. Hours passed unnoticed. The once neat desk was now covered with paper, each document carrying a fragment of truth. The room felt smaller, denser, filled with both anger and clarity. I realized how much of my life had been spent believing kindness would always be returned in kind. That belief had blinded me. But the woman they thought too soft to question anything had died the moment I heard their laughter. By the time the clock struck 3, I sat back, exhausted but clear-headed. My hands were steady now. The outlines of a plan were beginning to form, not driven by vengeance, but by necessity. I would reclaim what they had taken from me, Not just money but dignity, control and peace. I glanced once more at Clover, her rhythmic breathing soft and sure. "They have no idea," I murmured, closing the journal with quiet finality. "They think I'm still the same." But I wasn't. The woman who had given everything out of love was gone. In her place sat someone new, someone patient, methodical, and unafraid to fight back. The night had stripped me bare, but it had also rebuilt me. And as the first hint of dawn glowed faintly beyond the window, I made myself one final promise. They would never catch me unprepared again. The next morning I was up before sunrise. The air was cold and still, the kind of quiet that makes every thought sound louder. I dressed neatly, slipped my journal into my purse, and drove to see Mr. Jameson, Harold's old financial advisor. He had handled our accounts for years. Steady, precise, the sort of man Harold trusted implicitly. As I walked into his office, I could almost feel my late husband's presence, as if he were reminding me to stay calm and sharp. Mr. Jameson greeted me kindly, though his smile faltered when he saw my expression. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Whitmore?" he asked. "Not quite," I replied evenly. "I need to review every account, every document, every piece of paper tied to my name. Right now." He hesitated for a fraction of a second but then nodded. "Of course." I sat across from him, my hands clasped in my lap as he began to type. The soft hum of the computer filled the silence between us. As screen after screen loaded, I could see his face change. First confusion, then discomfort. His brow furrowed, his lips pressing into a thin line. When he finally looked up, his tone had shifted. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm not sure how to say this, but your son, Daniel, has full access to your accounts. Power of attorney, linked authorizations, joint permissions on nearly everything." For a heartbeat I felt nothing. Then the truth hit like fire through my chest. So it's real, I thought. Not paranoia. Not a misunderstanding. The betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was legal, deliberate, and complete. I leaned forward, my voice steady though my pulse thundered in my ears. "Then freeze every account. Immediately. Nothing moves until I say so." He blinked, surprised by my calmness. "Are you certain?" "Completely," I said. "Do it now." As he clicked through the systems, the finality of it settled in. I watched the screen reflect off his glasses, each confirmation message another door closing behind Daniel. I signed the revocation forms without hesitation. For the first time in months I felt something close to control. When I returned home that evening, the weight of exhaustion began to sink in, but I didn't have long to rest. My phone rang, Daniel's name flashing across the screen. For a moment I considered ignoring it, but I needed to hear his voice, to know which mask he'd choose tonight. "Hi, Mom." His tone was bright, rehearsed, sugar-coated. "How are you? I was just thinking of you." I could almost hear the smirk behind the words. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said smoothly. He launched into his performance. "Listen, I came across this amazing opportunity. A short-term investment, very limited time. Could really set us up for something big. I just need to move a few funds around, streamline things a bit." It was all so familiar. His confident tone, his casual manipulation dressed as inclusion. Every word was calculated. He was fishing, trying to gauge if I still trusted him. I smiled faintly into the phone, though he couldn't see it. "That sounds interesting, Daniel. Why don't we meet tomorrow to discuss it in person? I'd like to go over everything carefully." He hesitated briefly, then recovered. "Sure, Mom. That's great. Morning works." "Perfect," I said. "See you then." The next day, I arrived early at the cafe he suggested, a cozy place I knew well. I ordered tea, found a seat near the window, and discreetly turned on the small recorder hidden inside my purse. I had rehearsed my calmness in the mirror that morning. Every smile, every nod, every tone. Daniel walked in right on time, charming as ever, his confidence practically radiating off him. "Mom," he said warmly, kissing my cheek. "You look wonderful." "Thank you, dear," I replied, matching his smile with one of my own. He sat across from me, leaning forward eagerly. Within minutes, he began his pitch. It's a solid deal, Mom, completely safe. Just a short-term transfer, a small amount to secure my position. You'd barely notice it. I've already prepared the paperwork. All it needs is your signature. He spoke as if it were nothing, just a tiny favor, a quick signature. But underneath his charm, I heard the same arrogance that had filled that phone call days ago. I sipped my tea slowly, keeping my expression soft. I see, I said thoughtfully. Well, it does sound promising. Give me a day or two to review it, all right? He grinned, confident, sure of his victory. Of course, Mom. Take your time. I know you'll come around. I smiled back, polite and measured. I'm sure I will. When he finally left, I sat there for a long time, staring at the untouched stack of papers he'd left behind. The recorder in my purse was still running, quietly capturing the sound of his deception. He thought he'd fooled me again. But this time, I wasn't the same mother he once knew. That recording, his words, his tone, his confession, wasn't just proof. It was my turning point. And as I gathered my things to leave, a quiet satisfaction settled deep within me. For the first time in years, I was the one holding the evidence. The following morning, I walked into Evelyn Moore's office carrying a folder that felt heavier than it should have. Not because of its weight, but because of what it held. My proof, my betrayal, my turning point. The office smelled faintly of leather and coffee, orderly and composed, much like the woman behind the desk. Evelyn rose to greet me, her handshake firm, her eyes sharp and assessing. She wasn't the type to fill silence with unnecessary words. That alone made me trust her. I sat across from her, sliding the documents, recordings, and printouts across the polished wood. Everything is here, I said quietly. Every account, every signature, every lie. She opened the folder, scanning each page with a calm focus that made time seem irrelevant. The only sound was the rustle of paper and the faint hum of her computer. Finally she looked up, her voice steady but edged with something close to anger. This is financial exploitation, she said. They've been using your trust as their cover. But, she paused, almost smiling, you've built a solid case. You've done more groundwork than most investigators. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something close to relief. What do we do next? Yes. Evelyn leaned forward slightly. We take it all back. The next few hours were a blur of signatures, formal statements, and authorizations. Evelyn moved through it all with surgical precision. No hesitation, no wasted motion. Together, we filed the paperwork to revoke Daniel's power of attorney, stripping away the legal access he had wielded like a weapon. Every account, every line of credit, every linked signature, frozen. Evelyn coordinated directly with my bank. Her phone pressed to her ear as she spoke with quiet authority. I watched her work, feeling the strangest sense of empowerment wash over me. For months, my choices had been guided by guilt, by love, by a misplaced sense of obligation. Now, each signature I placed carried something different, strength. When the final document was notarized, Evelyn turned the folder back toward me. Within 48 hours, she said, your finances will be fully independent. Nothing will move without your direct approval. I nodded, exhaling slowly. And my estate. She smiled faintly. That's the final step. We're rewriting it today. I hesitated, then pulled the old will from my purse, the one I'd kept locked away for years. Daniel's name sat on every line. Heir, executor, beneficiary. The sight of it no longer made me sad. It only reminded me how blind I had been. I took Evelyn's black pen, drew one firm line through his name, and wrote across the front in capital letters, void. It wasn't an act of revenge. It was survival, pure and necessary. When we finished, Evelyn gathered the files neatly. You've done the hard part, she said, her voice gentler now. You faced it. Most people never do. I left her office with the folder under my arm, the city humming around me as if nothing monumental had just happened. But everything had changed. The invisible chains I hadn't even realized I was wearing had fallen away. That night, as I brewed tea in the quiet of my kitchen, I found myself imagining how long it would take for the truth to reach them. I pictured it vividly. Daniel and Elise sitting in some high-end restaurant, ordering wine, laughing, confident as ever. The waiter returning with a polite but awkward smile. "I'm sorry, sir. Your card's been declined." Daniel's confusion turning to irritation. Elise's forced laugh fading into tight panic. And then, later that night, the letter from the mortgage company arriving in their mailbox. The one announcing the title transfer and the termination of all joint ownership. Their perfect illusion, built entirely on my trust, would finally begin to crumble. I didn't take pleasure in it. I simply let the image settle in my mind like a closing chapter. I had spent years being the woman who gave too much, forgave too quickly, and trusted too deeply. But now I was someone else entirely. Someone who had learned that love without respect is nothing more than a leash. By the time the clock struck midnight, my accounts were safe, my estate secured, and my will rewritten. For the first time in years, I felt something I thought I'd lost forever. Peace. That evening, I heard the knock before I saw their faces. Sharp, angry blows against the wood, shaking the frame as if the force of it could undo everything I'd rebuilt. When I opened the door, Daniel stood there, his jaw tight. His face flushed a deep shade of red I hadn't seen since his childhood tantrums. Behind him, Elise lingered, pale and trembling, her eyes darting around the house like a thief searching for escape routes. "You're destroying us," Daniel shouted before I could even speak. His voice cracked under the weight of fury and fear. For a moment, I almost saw the little boy he used to be, the one who cried when he broke something he couldn't fix. But that image faded quickly. The man standing before me wasn't that child. He was a stranger molded by greed. I didn't flinch. Instead, I stepped aside and gestured toward the living room. "Come in," I said evenly. As they walked in, they froze. Evelyn was already there, sitting comfortably on the sofa, her posture straight, her briefcase beside her like an unspoken threat. She looked up calmly, offering a professional nod. "Good evening," she said, her tone polite but firm. Daniel's confidence faltered. His steps slowed as the realization dawned. "Who is this?" he demanded. "My attorney," I said simply, lowering myself into the armchair opposite them. "She's been helping me with a few adjustments." His eyes darted between us, panic flickering in his expression. "Adjustments? What adjustments?" Evelyn didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Mr. Whitmore," she said smoothly, "your recent financial activity under your mother's name has been reviewed. The findings indicate clear misuse of authority and fraudulent manipulation of accounts. The matter has been submitted to the proper agencies for further investigation." For a heartbeat, the room was silent, the kind of silence that hums in your bones. Elisa's breath hitched audibly. Daniel blinked, his composure cracking. "Investigation," he repeated, as if saying it out loud might make it less real. "You can't be serious. This is a misunderstanding." Evelyn's gaze didn't waver. "The documentation speaks for itself." Daniel turned to me then, his voice breaking through the anger. "You're ruining your own son, Mom. Do you even realize what you're doing?" I met his eyes, the same eyes that once looked up at me with trust, now full of blame. My voice was steady when I spoke. "No, Daniel. I'm reclaiming my dignity." That stopped him. He didn't know how to answer it. His mouth opened, then closed again, his face twisting with a mix of rage and disbelief. Elise tugged on his sleeve, whispering something frantic under her breath, but he shook her off. "This isn't over," he spat, though his voice wavered. "I think it is," I replied quietly. "You just don't know it yet." They stormed out, the door slamming so hard the window panes rattled. For a moment, the house felt impossibly still. Evelyn exhaled softly, gathering her papers. "You handled that perfectly," she said. I nodded, though my hands trembled slightly in my lap. It's strange, I murmured. I thought this moment would hurt. I looked toward the door where they had stood moments earlier. But it doesn't. Evelyn gave a small smile. That's what happens when the truth finally takes up space. Days later, the official inquiry began. Letters arrived on heavy paper with embossed seals. I didn't need to open them to know what they contained. Elise left a trail of desperate voicemails, her voice raw with panic. Please, can't we fix this? We made a mistake. Daniel's losing everything. I listened to the first one only once before deleting the rest. Some pleas don't deserve an answer. Their downfall was quiet but swift. Business partners withdrawing investments, accounts frozen, even Elise's family distancing themselves to preserve their reputation. Every thread of deceit they had woven around me began unraveling in their own hands. One afternoon, Evelyn called. It's done, she said. Your trust is finalized, and your estate is sealed. You're fully protected. For the first time in years, I felt my shoulders loosen, my breath flow freely. After we hung up, I sat by the window, the late sunlight spilling across the room in soft gold. Clover jumped into my lap, her purring vibrating against my palm as I stroked her fur. Outside, the world looked unchanged, same trees, same sky. Yet everything inside me was different. I no longer felt like a woman stripped of her power. I was whole again. They call it betrayal, I whispered, watching the sun dip behind the trees. But I call it freedom. And as Clover purred louder, I realized that peace doesn't always arrive with triumph. Sometimes it comes quietly, in the form of reclaimed silence.